Welcome to the latest installment of the Alberta Federation of Labor's Lunch and Learn series. The topic for this installment of the series is a just transition, good jobs for Alberta workers. For those who don't know me, my name is Gil McGowan. I'm president of the Alberta Federation of Labor, and we will be joined in our discussion today by a special guest, Charlie Angus, who is the NDP MP for Timmins-James Bay and also the party's natural resource critic. I'll give him a more fulsome introduction in a few minutes, but I just wanted to say a couple of words about how we're structuring the conversation this afternoon. First, I'm going to kick it off with some opening remarks about the unfolding energy transition and what it means for workers in general, especially workers here in Alberta. Then we're going to kick it over to Charlie to talk about the work that he's been doing as the NDP's natural resource critic in the federal parliament. And he's going to talk about opportunities, developments, and probably some frustrations too, in terms of convincing people to discuss this issue at the national level. So with that, I'm just going to start the conversation. And any conversation about the energy transition starts with oil and gas, especially here in Alberta. So oil and gas, as we all know, has made our province the engine of the Canadian economy. It has also brought unprecedented income, prosperity, and security for Albertans, including Alberta workers. The oil sands in particular has been our golden goose over the past 20 years. It's one of the biggest and most impressive industrial and technological achievements, not just in Canadian history, but in the history of the world. And Alberta workers built it, and we've made it run. Whether it's electricians, pipe fitters, boilermakers, ironworkers, carpenters, scaffolders, truck drivers, heavy equipment operators, you name it. You know, government and corporations may have provided the capital, but Alberta workers provided the labor. None of what has been built, none of what we've accomplished as a province would have been possible without the strength, skill, determination, and work ethic of Alberta workers. And we should all be proud of that fact. But like it or not, change is coming. The world has started the process of moving away from fossil fuels, so we can't sugarcoat this. Heat waves, fires, destructive storms are providing constant real-world reminders about the need for action on climate change. All the big automakers are switching to electric, which will have huge implications for oil demand. The cost of renewables is plummeting, giving fossil fuels a viable competitor for the first time ever. Global investors are getting leery about putting their money into projects that may become stranded assets and are instead piling investments into low carbon alternatives and infrastructure. And governments are signing ambitious international agreements to accelerate emissions reductions. So, we live in the world as it is, not how it was or how some people wish it would be. And the bottom line is that the world we live in is changing, and it's changing fast. So just to give you an example, a month and a half ago, I attended a conference where some of the world's biggest investment gurus were speaking. They said that the unfolding energy transition will be the biggest global economic paradigm shift since the Industrial Revolution, and it will take place in a fraction of the time. This means that we, as citizens of a major oil and gas producing jurisdiction, need to pivot and adapt. And if we don't, we run the risk of being left behind. To deal with this profound economic paradigm shift, the unions affiliated with the Alberta Federation of Labor have concluded that we need more than just a few speeches from politicians and a few token training programs. We need a sweeping plan for economic transformation, and we need the money and the political will to back it up. Now, to be clear, this doesn't mean that we advocate shutting down the oil and gas sector. Far from it. But it does mean helping that sector decarbonize so they can preserve jobs for as long as possible. It also means diversifying beyond oil and gas. The opportunities in this regard are massive. Specifically, we know that the low emission economy will remain a pipe dream, until it has the proper infrastructure in place. Trillions and trillions of dollars worth of infrastructure. Global investors understand this and they want to invest in it, and we as workers want to build it. So that's our message for governments in Ottawa and Edmonton. Don't pander to us by saying that change isn't coming or that we have decades to figure it out. And don't give us promises of training alone. Give us a plan, give us projects, give us jobs, and we'll do the rest. At some level, all Albertans are feeling the uncertainty associated with the unfolding energy transition. The uncertainty is turning into anxiety and even anger, and that's understandable. But the first step to mastering that anxiety and turning it into constructive action is to name it. So here it is. We are at a crossroads. We face decisions that will set the course for our province, indeed our country, for decades, perhaps generations to come. We don't have the luxury of doing nothing or merely tinkering around the edges and hoping for the best. That's a recipe for being left behind. We need to come together to face the threats associated with the unfolding energy transition and collectively turn them into opportunities. How do we do this? Well, we in the labor movement feel very strongly that we can start by remembering that we've done this before. Back in the 70s, it became clear that we were running out of conventional oil. We needed something else to act as the engine of our economy. That's when former Premier Peter Lougheed stepped up to the plate. His solution was natural gas, petrochemicals, and perhaps most importantly, and ironically, perhaps in the current context, the oil sands. But at the time, corporate investors, including big oil companies, weren't interested. The status quo had been too good for them for too long. They were firmly focused on short-termism, associated with quarterly reports, and they saw no reason for change. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? Economists call this status quo lock. It's why incumbents rarely lead change and are often left behind when it comes. Lougheed understood this. He understood that no country or region had successfully retooled its economy simply by, quote, letting the market decide. So look at America after the Great Depression, Western Europe after the Second World War, Japan and South Korea in the 60s and 70s, and even Canada's post-war industrial boom. All of these places, including our own country, became economic powerhouses because of public vision, public policy, and public intervention, not in spite of it. So that was also the approach taken by Lougheed here in Alberta. He created a public body to fund technological innovation. He created crown corporations to build infrastructure, to support his vision for a more diversified energy sector, and to take the lead on building new projects. He didn't give industry blank checks. Instead, he took majority ownership positions in projects on behalf of Albertans. He initiated the projects and offered opportunities for industry to come along for the ride instead of the other way around. He also reminded Albertans that the province belonged to Albertans, and he urged them to think like owners. Finally, he wasn't afraid to regulate because he understood that what was good for corporations wasn't necessarily good for Albertans. So, for example, he introduced a rule requiring gas companies to strip off natural gas liquids before export to make them available for in-province upgrading. That one decision, a regulation that was imposed by government on oil companies, laid the foundation for the multi-billion-dollar petrochemical industry that's still thriving in Alberta today. By doing all of these things, Lougheed put the future of Alberta in the hands of Albertans instead of leaving it in the hands of others. Today, as we face another, arguably bigger set of economic challenges, we need to relearn the lessons of Lougheed. That means we need an industrial policy that adapts our economy by pivoting within the oil and gas sector towards low emission and no emission uses like hydrogen and carbon fiber, and one that adapts beyond oil and gas towards things like renewables, geothermal, and manufacturing based on access to cheap electricity. It also means we need the administrative tools and mechanisms to implement the vision. These could include things like an energy transition crown corporation to build the infrastructure that we need and to partner on projects, a labor market strategy to make sure Albertans are trained for the new jobs, and regulations and community benefit agreements that attach strings, major project funding, and ensure that Alberta workers and Alberta businesses get the most possible out of these new developments. Money to pay for all of this crucial work can and should come from the post-payout boom in royalties that we're currently enjoying based on record profits being earned by oil companies. It can also come from a substantial just transition transfer from the federal government that we in the labor movement are currently lobbying for, a carbon tax that's repatriated back to Alberta from the federal government, something we hope to convince the next Alberta government to do, and from an excess profits tax from oil companies who are currently gouging consumers at the gas pumps. Our goal needs to be to future-proof the Alberta economy by moving to where the jobs will be, not where they were. By having government, business, and labor work together towards shared public goals on transforming our economy, we can seize this opportunity to secure our future. These are the things that we in the labor movement have been discussing with the federal government. They're the things that we want to discuss with the next provincial government. And we recognize it's a work in progress, but for the sake of all Albertans, it's work that can and must succeed. So, we're deeply engaged with these conversations about energy transition and what it means for Alberta workers. And so for our Lunch and Learn today, I'm really pleased to be joined, as I mentioned at the outset, by Charlie Angus, who's been playing a pivotal role at the federal level in his capacity as the NDP's natural resource critic. He sits, of course, on the Parliament's Natural Resource Committee, where they're actually actively looking at the question of energy transition. So we've invited Charlie here to talk about the NDP's vision, what they've put on the table, what they're hearing back from the federal government, and how we can work together with people like Charlie, the labor movement, working with our political partners to make these visions a reality. So before I turn it over, I just want to remind everyone that Charlie is a long-time friend of the labor movement, in addition to his position as the MP for Timmins-James Bay and his position as the NDP's federal NDP's natural resource critic. He is, he lived through 3 or 4 what he describes as unjust transitions in the mining industry in northern Ontario. So he's lived what we're living through here in Alberta, and he's seen how it can go wrong, and that makes him even more determined to help us find a way to make it go right. The final thing I'll say is that in addition to being a fabulous advocate and parliamentarian, Charlie is also a well-known musician. He's the lead singer of a band called the Grievous Angels. He has played at the Calgary Music Festival, and he's hoping that he'll get an opportunity to do the same at some time in the future at the Edmonton Music Festival. So I haven't had a chance to see him perform myself, but I hope at some time I'll get that opportunity. So with that, I'm going to say thank you very much, Charlie, for joining us, and I'll turn the floor over to you to discuss the work that you've been doing on these important issues.
Well, thank you, Gil, and I thank the Alberta Federation of Labor for inviting me. And I have played Edmonton Folk Festival twice, so I don't want to be seen as though I'm shamelessly promoting myself. But come on, how come I'm not back there? I got this beat so I could get to Edmonton, so I could put the question. I'm really pleased to be here. I see a lot of friends here. Scott Libby, District 3. Steelworkers are very, very important where I come from in District 6, and we're going to talk a bit about some of the work that we've done with them. And of course, Heather McPherson, my colleague, who's a lot smarter than me on everything, and I'm so glad she's participating because we talk about these issues all the time, and with our colleague Blake Desjardins, who's been working with me on some of these files. I'm going to just say, I've been almost 20 years in federal politics. Used to be my day job in federal politics was the smut and corruption file, and boy, with government, there's never a shortage of smut and corruption to be exposing, and I certainly had a lot of fun going after corrupt senators and backroom deals and people being given those kind of $90,000 secret envelopes with money. But I asked the party after the last election to give me a new file, and I wanted this file, the natural resources file. I wanted it for a couple of reasons. As Gil says, the issue of where we go with this transition is the issue of this generation, and it will be the issue for the coming generations. If we don't get this right, we are condemning our children to a very, very brutal future. And that's the reality. And we need to do this right. And I have been concerned that we are not so far doing it right. There's been a lot of beautiful talk, a lot of great talk, but talk doesn't put food on the table, and talk is not going to transition the economy. And the other reason I wanted this file is I come from natural resources background. I come from mining country, and I know the incredible skills that go into workers in the natural resources sector. It is a way of life. It's not like other jobs. It has its own legends, its own elan, its own spirit. I wanted to raise my kids in a mining town because I love that culture and the spirit of it. And I have lived through some pretty unjust transitions. And in my discussions with government bureaucrats, I always ask them, "What's your vision of a transition?" And they start talking about this, that, and the other. I said, "You know what it actually looks like? It's a U-Haul leaving in the middle of the night. That's what the reality is. It's like when someone who put their future and their belief and built up a community, and they invested and did the fundraising and the bingos for the hospitals and that, and then they're suddenly told, sorry, there's no future for you here, and where do you go?" And in the unjust transitions that we've lived through, we saw the pensions of workers taken. We saw a gold mine of opportunity for the consultants. My God, nothing like a transition for consultants. In my town, I could see them coming at 6 and 7 at a time, walking down the main street, just hoovering up all that government money. And at the end of the day, we got nothing out of it. So we cannot afford to do this wrong. That's why I'm really committed to this file. I want to just say also that if we're talking about a transition, it's here. It started. The economic forces are moving quickly, and we're not doing anybody any favors by pretending that those forces are not moving. And when we talk about a transition, we got to stop talking about a transition from and a transition to, because I think that is going to be the make or break moment for us. We know that the oil and gas future is not going to be there the way it was in the 20th century. But to simply say we're going to walk away on that past, what are we giving people? In order to get to this clean energy economy, we have to build a new economy. We have to make the investments, and it has to be credible. And right now, this is the real focus that as New Democrats, we have been putting our efforts into. You probably heard about the NDP accord with the Liberals. And just to be very clear, we don't have to agree with them on a whole bunch of things, and we will disagree with them on many things. But there were two really important elements for us in signing this accord. One, obviously, was we wanted to get this national dental care plan, which is the first new investment in federal public health in half a century, and that's a significant win. And getting that off the ground is going to take at least 2 years of heavy, heavy lifting. And at the end of that, there's going to be a lot of kids and seniors and working class people who are going to be a lot better off because we got that accord. But the other element of the accord is we need to put the tools in place to actually make this transition work. And that's not going to happen through a budget. It's not going to happen through a mission statement. It's not going to happen through a bunch of press conferences. It's going to take some serious lifting to put in place a credible energy future. And that's the other reason I wanted to be on this file. We are negotiating very seriously with all the top government ministers on this file, and we're pushing them as New Democrats very hard on this. So I'm going to get into some of what we believe needs to be done in order to make this work. But I also want to just say that for the party at the federal level, we understand that we're not getting anywhere in terms of dealing with the climate crisis without Alberta. Alberta is key. And as Gil says, it's Alberta workers that are key, because Alberta is an energy power. And the transition to developing new energy opportunities is going to require the heavy lifting that is possible, where you have the skill, the workers, and an investment climate where we could actually draw people into building this economy. So we want to work very, very closely with Alberta on this. The present government is obviously not our best partners, but we know that we have a lot of support on the ground in Alberta of people who are thinking about what this needs to look like and how we can leverage those incredible skills within the Alberta market to actually create a good clean energy future. So I'm just going to walk you through some of the steps. We've been negotiating back and forth with all the key ministers, and we've put a series of bottom lines on the table. One of the first bottom line is we need to hear a very strong message that the government gets the urgency of the situation to act. Now, governments make statements all the time, but I don't think that we've heard that kind of message that's going to reassure workers that they're serious about this, to reassure the public that they're actually willing to take the steps necessary, uh, and also to reassure investors. Is Canada a place where you want to come and invest in a clean energy future? I'm not hearing the big vision thing from the government. We're asking that as step one. We want a real serious commitment. So what does that commitment mean? Well, it's really about the issue of scale. It's like we either go big or we go home on this file. If we don't put serious financial commitments in, we're going to start to see the jobs wither away. A couple jobs here, a project not approved there. We need to actually be saying we're transitioning to this new economy. And for that to happen, the government has to be putting on the table a substantive amount of money. How that money is going to be used, well, certainly I know the Alberta Federation of Labor is talking about the transfer. That is one very, very good model. The other opportunity would be to develop a crown corporation that is independent of government, that has a whole of government buy-in, that has literally the billions that are needed in order to entice investment, to be responsible for training, and issues in terms of transition. It's right now it's being done piecemeal, and that's not giving workers any confidence, and it's not giving communities confidence. So we're looking to say to the feds, you need to come with a big financial commitment on the table, with a mechanism for delivering that can work with the regions, can work with the provinces, and also work to reassure investors that we're going to be building on this clean energy mandate and this clean energy future. The other element that we've been talking to the government on is the need to get serious about the east-west electrical grid. How is it possible to create all these new energy opportunities in Alberta, Saskatchewan, if we don't have a market that we can, a means to move all this energy to market? We know, given the huge investments that are being made in batteries and in electric vehicles, we need a grid that can actually move energy. It's not realistic, I think, at this point to say we're going to build a grid from, Vancouver to St. John's. That's not how it's going to get done. This is going to be done regionally. It's going to be done basically in hubs, but we have some real opportunities to make that happen, and the feds are going to have to come to the table in a big way in order to tap the energy opportunities that we see, particularly right now in Alberta. I was talking to some European investors who work on the clean energy markets in Germany and they said there's no place in Europe that has 1/10 of the potential that you can find in South Central Alberta on any given day. The potential to create that energy economy is just so much greater than what is in Europe. So we have that potential, but it's going to take, again, some serious federal commitments to actually start to build the infrastructure. And this is our argument we're saying with the government again and again. They keep talking as though this economy is going to just happen. Economies don't happen. Economies are created. And certainly, I've been doing some of my history reading as well when not a single energy company would even think of Fort Mac. That was provincial money. That was That was serious government money that built those operations. And even then, the companies still weren't all that interested. It was a major public investment that made that industry grow. And that's the kind of investment that we need now in order for the transition. There's going to be a bunch of questions, and I'm going to admit right off the top, I'm the worst guy in the world when it comes to getting into the weeds. I don't even know. I don't do weeds. I get smarter people to work with me who can handle all the stuff about the bridge financing that we're going to need, the pension issues, the training. We have Blake Desjardins, our MP in Edmonton, is really on this, but I'm just going to say is that we are looking at EI provisions for workers who are not going to be making that transition to the new economy, the older workers. We want to have something very credible, and we've been working a lot behind the scenes. It's just I'm not the best guy to walk you through all those details, but it is something that the New Democrats are really, really working on. We're pushing the government on what this just transition legislation is going to look like. It's supposed to be ready for the end of the year. We're telling them it has to be a credible plan, and they're going to be coming back at us with what we want to see in that to make it work. The government's made promises of the Clean Jobs Training Center. We want to see details, and we want this process has to be run by labor. It has to be run by labor, and I can say this with the experience I've had in when we've seen the uranium sector disappear out of Elliott Lake, the silver mining operations in my region, the iron mines, when it's handled by anybody else other than labor, workers get screwed over. So we've been really adamant with the government that when they start to put the training programs in place, labor has to be in the driver's seat in a big way. So I will say, and I'm often pretty cynical about government. They never seem to stop breaking my heart or letting me down. Is that we're actually having some pretty substantive, serious discussions on these issues. We're coming at it as New Democrats of being able to put a plan in place that moves us forward, that says we can actually go someplace, as opposed to just saying let's start figuring out how to dismantle everything. We believe that transition is about shifting opportunities, shifting skills, and shifting investments so that we are not left in the situation where people are leaving in the middle of the night with their U-Hauls. That is the thing we have to make sure doesn't happen. And I think we are in a unique position right now, and we've got about probably another year or two to put all this in place, but it has to get done, and we want to work with labor. And my office is open anytime for people from labor who are dealing with specifics on this, because we got to learn the lessons of what works, and also learn lessons from what didn't work. So with that, I could talk all day. I'm a politician, but I figured you guys got a lunch to eat, and you probably got smarter questions than I can come off with the top of my head. So I'll turn it over to you guys.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. I think we already do have a few questions. MC, did you receive some questions that you could share with?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've got a tough one for you, Charlie. This is from Sarah with Stanley. She's from the Pembina Institute here in Alberta. And is just asking you if you can speak to how gender and responding to the needs of women and gender diverse people in particular fits into the big vision for energy transition for your party. And in your view, how is gender-based analysis plus, for those listening, this is a specific federal government program, or not program, but federal government analysis. How is this being applied to these just transitions conversations that you've had at the federal level? And what does accountability on this particular issue look like for you?
Those are really that's really good questions, and thanks for throwing me right into the weeds there. But these are weeds that are very important for us to work through. Um, uh, this issue has been raised in our negotiations, certainly by Laurel Collins, who's my counterpoint on this. She represents the environment file, and we have spoken with government about needing to understand that this is not just about the guys um, um, working the drills, but this is about entire communities, and this is about making sure that when we move an economy, that we're recognizing the people who are not necessarily in the first wave of work, but who are be seriously impacted. And so the gender lens is going to be really, really important. How that's going to be negotiated is something that we're working towards over the next few months. We've set up separate meetings with Minister Qualtrough, who's actually been very keen on a lot of these issues to try and get a frame of what that would look like. Because this is a much more complex beast, you know. I mean, again, I can give you the example from where I come from. When the uranium market collapsed, well, we knew how many jobs we were losing. We knew what the effects were, and it was limited. But we're seeing here, this is going to be a very complex transition because we have people who are going to stay working. We have people who were in the fly-in, fly-out crews. We have communities that'll be affected. So trying to get this whole gender lens and figuring that out is going to take a lot of work, but that's definitely something that we have been meeting about and trying to get a sense of what needs to be done. So I certainly look forward to the Pembina Institute coming forward and giving us some practical ideas that we could bring back to the negotiations.
Well, thanks for that, Charlie, and I'll be sure to hold your feet to the fire on that answer. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Scott Lunny, who is the director for District 3, which is Western Canada for the Steelworkers. So over to you, Scott.
Can you hear me? Is that
yeah,
work?
We can hear you. Yep.
Thanks, MC and Gil and Charlie for your comments. And actually, I'm very pleased with what both of you said about transitioning to something rather than transitioning away, because as Charlie mentioned, our union and folks like me have had a lot of experience with the U-Haul in the middle of the night. And so the one thing I think, Charlie, that I hope you're pushing the federal government to do, and hopefully the federal government's pushing the provinces, is really to double down on the mining and resource industries that are a part of the future economy, that are part of the green economy, and we do have experience and capacity in mining, copper, zinc, nickel, even some rare earth minerals, and in forestry, and a lot of transferable skills to those sectors, and a lot of sort of geographical similarity to oil and gas and things like that aren't part of the future economy, and I think it's going to be important that we have those kind of jobs available to transition to. People will understand that. And then my question actually is a political one. Like I know that Joe Rogan says that we're communists and Trudeau's a communist dictator, but do we really think politically that we can get a federal government governed by liberals or conservatives to make the kind of public investment through a crown corporation or whatever that is absolutely necessary for us to have something to transition to? Like, we don't do industrial strategy in Canada, unfortunately, and other countries do around the world very successfully, and they do have jobs then and investment to transition to. But if we leave it, as I think Gil said, to the market, I mean, it's just a fail, right? Like too much money gets absorbed by profit and consultants and failed plans and whatever. If we don't have that public investment, maybe I'm cynical. I'm wary of the liberals doing more than talking about making the necessary investment. Thanks.
Well, couple of really good points. So definitely on critical minerals, it's something I watch very closely because I live in a town called Cobalt, and they're always. My wife says she'll shoot the helicopters out of the plane if they try and build in our backyard, but she's in Alberta, and what can I do? I'm saying, hey, if they want to build a mine in my backyard, I'll sell them the property. But no, the issue on critical minerals is interesting because the government is pumping it and pumping it and pumping it, but they don't have a strategy. And I was just at PDAC. I'm always at the prospectors, developers, and simply mining it is not going to necessarily create the energy economy. There has to be a plan, and that's something that I don't think these guys get. Like, we need, if we're going to be using lithium, copper, and that, we need to actually have a good strategy of where that clean energy, how the minerals will be tied into it, because otherwise they'll just mine it and sell it wherever. I mean, that's how mining works. So we're pushing them. They need a coherent strategy, but it is definitely going to be a boom in mining sectors and a lot of skilled. There's a huge shortage in skills right now, and so there is an opportunity there. It's a good point on the Crown corporations, and we've been going back and forth on this because we know the government ideologically hates this as something that they see as, just because it works so damn well for decades now. It's not something the neoliberal government or conservative government wants to do. But we're feeling that given the scope of what they're facing, the need to actually do this in a big way or go home is giving them is cutting off options for them. If we can get some kind of major public commitment on this, and it is a big if, but if we can get that, I think it's going to be a huge win for workers and a huge win for the environment. So we're putting our chips on that right now, and we expect some pretty strong pushback. But I think if Labor buys in, and if Labor pushes, and Labor starts sending clear messages that they need to see a very, very strong signal that the government is putting a public investment forward, it will certainly help the negotiations on that.
Yeah, if I may weigh in on that question too, the political opportunity in front of us, I would actually suggest that the stars have aligned in a way that was unexpected for us, being successful with ambitious plans. And I say that for a number of reasons. First, because of this, the deal that was struck between the federal Liberals and the federal New Democrats has made the federal Liberals more open to a more ambitious and approach than it perhaps would otherwise have been the case. Related to that, I think it's great that Charlie is one of the leaders of the negotiation. I mean, Charlie, I don't want to cast aspersions, but not every member of the NDP caucus gets it, but Charlie does. So, the deal between the Liberals and the New Democrats presents an opportunity. Having Charlie at the table means that they're in a better position to seize that opportunity. The final thing that I'll say is that the business community is open to this in a way that perhaps they weren't even just a few years ago, and that goes back to one of the comments I made in my opening remarks a couple of months ago, as in my capacity as the vice chair of the local authority's pension plan, and that's one of the legacies from the New Democrats that the UCP didn't dismantle. They gave independence to our big pension plans, and we've got labor representation on the boards. So we get to attend all these meetings with big investors that before had just been behind closed doors, with rich folks, right? So here we are in the room. There, and what it was clear is that there is an appetite to invest trillions of dollars. They see the economy changing. Like this is not notional. I mean, big investment firms like BlackRock and stuff. They were actually unequivocal when questioned at the conference. They said, it's not a question of if there's going to be an energy transition, it's when, and we think it's going to be sooner rather than later. And in fact, there was someone at that conference from the government of Alberta that was trying to give the spin about, the status quo will be safe for years and it's not going to happen they laughed him out of the room. The private investors literally laughed these folks out of the room. And so because of the political alignment, because of the opportunity with business, I think, talking about a Crown corporation it's a legitimate conversation that has better prospects of being realized than any time in the last 30 or 40 years. And the final thing I'll say is that advocating for a Crown corporation makes sense, and I think it will resonate with people because there is a fear that this government will be defeated, and if they are, we need something in place that could live past a Liberal government, right? So, the Conservatives may be able to sweep aside policies and programs. It'll be harder for them to sweep aside a Crown corporation once it's been created.
Thanks, Scott, for that question, and I definitely share your skepticism, but I'm inspired by both what Charlie and Gil say, and I hope that there is an opportunity to make this a reality. Next, I'd like to turn it over to Scott Crichton, who is the Assistant Business Manager for the IBEW Local 424. So over to you, Scott. I'm just going to open your mic now.
Thank you. Thank you, MC, and thank you, Gil, for putting this together. Charlie, nice to see you again, my friend.
Yes.
In a number of years. Looking good, pal. Right on.
Yep.
I guess, Charlie, you know me, I'm a labor activist. And when we talk about any type of transition, workers' rights are top of mind for me. Out here in Alberta, I think the biggest obstacle we're facing as an electrical worker union is the anti-labor legislation and CLAC. We have these, it's an ongoing battle. We have the members that are trained and skilled and can do this work tomorrow. You give them a set of blueprints and a screwdriver and they'll build you whatever you want. What we can't do is try to undo a cert that's been put into place by CLAC. It's very difficult in Alberta, and that's becoming a major challenge for us. And I think that needs to be part of the conversation going forward. We need to talk about the government's commitment to ILO Convention 87 and 98 and make sure that they're meeting these ILO conventions that they've made a commitment to. And we also need to have a discussion about the Fair Wages and Hours of Labor Act. I had a young man that came into my office and he said he wanted to be an electrician. And he'd been doing hot tubs and was paying around $25 an hour, but no pension. He wanted to start an electrical apprenticeship. I said, no problem. Placed him with an electrical contractor. They started paying him $17 an hour and he just couldn't make it work. He and his wife, they tried and they looked at their bills and they just could not make it work at $17 an hour. So he went back to doing the hot tubs. And, how do we get around that? Well, the only way that I could think of is the Fair Wages and Hours of Labor Act. We need to bring that back. We need to hold this Liberal government's feet to the fire. So he was the Minister of Infrastructure. He finished the consultation. And unfortunately, when he didn't get reelected, it kind of died there. Without some kind of wage control legislation put into place, we're going to have a real trouble getting people wanting to go into the skilled trades, not because they don't want to get into that career. It's because they can't afford to. So that's all I got, but keep up the good work, watching you all the time and really inspiring watching what you're doing, Charlie.
Well, thanks so much. And I want to get back to your training center because we are adamant that money for transition and training, we want to run it through through labor because you guys have those skills. So these are really important points. And I will say that I hate CLAC. They threatened to sue me once because I did a big expose on them in another lifetime. So I've got my scars with those guys. And the issue, we've been actually really hammering in our meetings with the government pretty hard on this. We say, that Joe Biden always talks about this new energy economy that's tied to good paying union jobs. He always says that. He went to COP26. He said Americans are going to get good paying union jobs from the clean energy economy. And I said, I've never, ever heard Justin Trudeau say that. I've never heard the Liberals say good paying union jobs. Maybe Seamus says it when he comes out to do his roundtables, but I haven't really heard it in Parliament. I haven't heard it from the Prime Minister. And we've been actually pushing him hard on this, saying, if you guys are serious, you need to send that message that this is about good paying union jobs, because that's going to reassure, number one, workers, but it's also going to give people in the larger community a belief that this is going to be about an economic boom that's coming as opposed to an economic bust. On these issues, on the labor acts and that, Scott, Chris in my office knows these files like the back of his hand. If you want to talk to Chris, again, I don't do weeds. Chris knows all the weeds on labor legislation, and so anything we can do on that file, we will certainly do. And like I said, I look forward to getting back to Edmonton and coming to see you guys.
Yeah, if I could just jump in on that subject too. I mentioned it in passing in my opening remarks, but I think it's worth emphasizing. When the government puts money on the table for the kind of big projects that we're proposing, there's an opportunity to attach strings. And there are mechanisms to make sure that those strings include requiring that whoever is getting the money to partner with the Crown Corporation or participate in the construction of, building out the electrical grid, for example, that those companies, partly in exchange for getting access to the capital, they commit to hiring union, right? And this is not notional. There's a process that, what we call them community benefit agreements. They can be written right into the contracts that are written up with companies that are working with the Crown Corporation. The current government in BC took this approach when building out. They had a very ambitious a program of building out public sector infrastructure, and they were unapologetic. They said that if a company wants to participate in these big infrastructure projects, they have to go union. And there was some squawking, but that passed, and and as Charlie said, that those kind of commitments reassured the workers that that this transit, like that kind of spending, would lead to jobs for them, and it did. We can do the same thing on a much bigger scale with community benefit agreements related to anything either the federal government or the provincial government spends. And I think that's, Scott, that dealing with labor legislation is a provincial responsibility. And if the UCP get back in, it'll be hard to convince them to change the labor laws that give CLAC and the non-union such advantages. But if there's a federal Crown Corporation that is committed to building out the green economy and advancing this energy transition, they can just write into their contracts. It doesn't matter what the provincial labor legislation says. So I actually think we should pursue labor reform with the next government. Hopefully it's a new Democrat labor-friendly government. It'll be a lot easier then. But even if they don't, I think what we're talking about, what Charlie and I are talking about here today, gives us an opportunity to get around those laws by tying strings to the capital that would be provided for these projects.
Great, thanks, Gil, and thanks, Charlie, and thanks, Scott, for your question. I just wanted to say one thing. We've got another comment here from Sarah Winstanley from the Pembina Institute, just saying that she loves how we're talking about strings attached here. I think that's one thing we've heard both Charlie and Gil say several times, and she just wanted to add that one of those strings could be the gender-based analysis lens. So let's keep that in mind. At this point, I don't have any other questions or hands raised, but I would like to open the floor if there's anyone else that would like to take a moment to even make a comment. It doesn't necessarily have to be a question. Is there anyone else? Yeah, sure, Scott.
Thank you. Just a quick question for Charlie. I know that there was a committee set up and certain people were invited to come and present. Is that committee still ongoing? Did you need somebody maybe from us to go and help you?
Yeah, that would have been great. Yeah, the Conservatives are doing everything they can to monkey wrench anything about a just transition, anything to do with workers' rights. They're turning our committee into an absolute shit show. So I've had to come up with the brass knuckles a little bit, and now everybody's mad at me, but hell, I don't care. They're not my relatives. But we're trying really to drive the committee at Natural Resources to actually get focused on stuff that will work. So we're going to be pushing to get stuff on the electricity grid. and that might be a good opportunity for you guys to come forward. But yeah, it's the Conservatives are doing everything they can to either build fear or to undermine the work. And I want to jump back to something Gil said about, the moment that we have in our history. These guys are completely off base, because my approach is, I come from a pretty solid labor, social democratic background, but to make this work, I'll talk to anybody. You want me to talk to Suncor? I'll talk with Suncor. I don't care. I'll talk to anybody about what we need to do. And we find a lot of people want to talk to us. Industry, economic development, mayors, they all know we've got to make a plan. So the stars may be aligning up for something interesting. So we will reach out to you guys for committee stuff in future for sure. Right now, I think we've got one more meeting on this, and I'm just trying to keep it from being a complete conservative shit show. But it's a lot of work just keeping people focused.
It's not a big deal for me to fly to Ottawa and help you out with something like that. Just, you know how to get a hold of me. Just let me know, Charlie.
That's great. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Scott, and thanks, Charlie. So I've got two more hands raised now. I'll turn it over to Scott Lunny next, and then after that, Heather McPherson.
I just want to say thanks to Gil and Charlie. I think this is really a valuable discussion, and I really appreciate both of your comments and the other questions as well. And I guess I sort of had a question like other Scott, everybody named Scott, but like what can we do? Like we're all labor activists, but like what can folks do right now to help push this along other than having these kind of discussions? Like, I mean, I know we can talk to the companies that we work with, and I think you're right, Charlie. Like there's lots of opportunity to engage with some of our employers right now because they're looking at the future too. But what else can we do to kind of push this right now?
Well, that's a great question, and I think we'll be coming back to you guys with a couple of suggestions because we've certainly been spending a lot of time with AFL on this. It's really vitally important that the national discussion on this has Alberta workers at the front of it. That will give it a legitimacy that we don't get anywhere else. It also puts the crazy conservative loony faction back in the box where they belong because they're not helping this file. Civil society and the environmentalists and the urban organizations, their job is to keep the fire on the Liberals. But to build this thing nationally, we need labor, and we need labor speaking with one voice, and we need labor talking not frightened and defensive, but saying this is what we want, this is our future, and this is where we need to go. So I think we'll come back with a few ideas to get you guys to sort of that we're all singing from the same choir book. And the other thing is it helps us a lot when we go back in to negotiate with the government because they are scrambling, they are trying to figure this out. This isn't their normal turf, and they're more comfortable talking to lobbyists, but they know that the lobbyists aren't going to get them through this. So we have a window. Whether or not we get through that window remains to be seen. But if everybody's pushing in the same direction, we've got a hell of a bigger chance. So I think we'll get back to you, Scott, on some of these issues.
Yeah, and we will as well. As you can imagine, we at the Federation have been working very closely with Charlie for months now to coordinate our efforts. But in addition to that, MC, our Legislative Affairs Director, and I have been working hard to build alliances with civil society groups, with other labor groups. And, as Charlie said, and I noted as well, there's a huge opportunity here. And but the window of opportunity is probably going to close relatively quickly. We got about a year, I think, to take full advantage of it. And it makes sense for us to sing from the same song sheet. So with that in mind, we at the Federation of Labor are in the process now of putting together a proposed blueprint that could be, the blueprint for energy transition, right? And we're going to release it in September. And it's very much the product of all sorts of conversations between unions, with people like Charlie and our other allies on the civil society front. And we're going to, I just want to say, like, like in terms of labor, especially Alberta labor being at the front, we've established that already, right? I mean, we've been in there like a dirty shirt with all these various Liberal ministers, and they're turning to us because they know that they don't have much legitimacy in Alberta, and they know that they can't reach their climate goals without Alberta. So they're clinging to us like a life preserver, and that's good. That's good. That puts us in a power position, and so but in order to take full advantage of it, it would be great if we could get to the point of a shared set of asks, and so for both government and employers. And that's the final thing I'll say, and I've mentioned it before, but employers are lining up behind this in a way that is unusual, and so we actually have allies where we wouldn't expect them. But I would point out that the oil industry has its own agenda, and that involves using this moment to get lots of money to pay for their pet projects, which include carbon capture, sequestration, small modular nukes, and hydrogen. We can agree with them on hydrogen. The other ones, perhaps not as much, but that's all they want to do. And if they suck up all the public money on these projects, then we would have missed an opportunity. So that I just want to raise that as a flag that we need to be aware of. They have an agenda. We have to get our agenda together so that the federal government can choose the better one. And I think that one will be ours.
Well, I'm inspired by the conversation, so I want to thank everyone for their questions, and I want to turn it over to Heather McPherson, who is next. Maybe our final words, final question.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Oh, perfect.
Yep, we can hear you.
Well, yeah, thanks so much, Gil, for putting this together. Thanks, MC, for hosting us, and of course, thanks, Charlie, for all of your conversation today. It's of course the most important issue that has to be facing Alberta members of Parliament. I mean, there's nothing else. But some of the things I wanted to just flag, I know we're running out of time, but just take a moment to flag for everyone too, is that comment we made about the string being attached is so vital. It's so important because we watched what happened with the orphan well issue. We'd written to the minister at the time to ask the strings be attached to ensure that we were using unionized labor, that we were making sure that this was going to the workers, that it wasn't going to, the up highs and the corporations, and there were no strings attached. Ultimately, nothing was put in place, and it didn't clean up the wells. It didn't do the work that we needed to do. So I think that strings attached piece is really important for us to keep in mind. And I also was listening to Scott and thinking about the Alberta labor laws that have been so damaging and so dangerous. And I've brought this up to Charlie before, and I've brought it up at our caucus table. But when these things, this deterioration of our rights happens in Alberta, the other provinces are watching. It spreads. It doesn't stay in Alberta. This is not just something that's hurting Alberta workers. This is something that will spread across the country. So we need to be paying attention to it as a national issue, even if it is a provincial legislation. So those things I think are really key. The other pieces that I think are such great opportunities for us, the electrical grid, Charlie speaking about the electrical grid, that's a great opportunity. The hydrogen piece, fabulous opportunity. Right now what we're seeing with Ukraine and with the gas going to Germany, the natural gas, hydrogen can play a role in making Germany and East Central Europe less dependent on Russian energy. And then finally, I think, we talked about having underrepresented groups be prioritized in this just transition, making sure that women are prioritized. But I also think, we've listened to some of the labor groups talk about what Indigenous apprenticeship can look like, what Indigenous training programs can look like. And I think that's something we've got to take. So I just wanted to say this has been fantastic. And I really, really appreciate that I got to spend the afternoon listening to this. We're going to get Charlie out to Alberta. We're going to have all of you guys out into my backyard. We'll have a barbecue. We can keep talking about this. Thanks very much for letting me join on.
Well, thanks very much, Heather, for joining us, and thanks very much for everything that you do for working people in this province. It'd be great to have a few more NDP MPs from Alberta, but the two that we have
We're working.
performing. Yeah, I mean, you punch way above your weight and you make a huge difference at the national level, but especially for us here in Alberta, and we want to thank you. So with that, we've run out of time. We've reached the allotted end, the appointed end of this session. So on behalf of the Alberta Federation of Labour, I want to thank Charlie for joining us to share his wisdom and his perspective on these important issues. And also, I just, I want to thank you, Charlie, personally for your friendship and your determination to make sure that workers don't get forgotten in Parliament. That happens too often, but I know on your watch, you do everything you can to make sure that doesn't happen. And it means a lot to her. So thanks very much for spending the time to be here with us. And I also want to thank MC, our Legislative Affairs Director here at the Federation. She's relatively new to our organization, but she's made just a world of difference. And I just want to thank you, MC, for all the work that you do to pull this event together and others as well. And then finally, I want to thank everyone who's joined us on what is a beautiful summer day. You spent your lunch hour with us instead of being outside in the warm weather, and I appreciate that sacrifice. Thanks for making this event such a success. And with that, I will wish you a good afternoon and a good summer. Okay, take care, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.